The first crack of lightning split the sky directly overhead, and Ursa Strongtusk did not flinch. She stood at the edge of the ridge above Cauldron Hollow, arms loose at her sides, chin lifted toward the boiling black clouds rolling in off the volcanic peaks to the west, and she snarled. It was not a theatrical thing, not a performance for the benefit of the two merchants cowering behind their overturned wagon 30 yards back. It was just what her face did when she was angry, and right now, with the storm rushing in and the trade road crumbling at her feet, and the sound of war drums echoing somewhere deep in the mountain pass behind her, she was very angry indeed. The merchants had shouted at her to take cover. She had ignored them. The wind whipped her long black hair across her face, plastered her fitted travel leathers against the lean, powerful lines of her body. She wore close-cut dark leather trousers laced tight down each calf, a sleeveless upper vest of dark green reinforced hide that fit close across her broad shoulders and deep chest, and a wide belt of tooled brown leather that cinched her waist and held the short machete she never went anywhere without. Her skin was the color of summer moss, deep and vivid, and the paired ivory tusks that curved up from her lower jaw were not small decorative things. They were real and proud and sharp, because she came from Greytusk lineage and she had never filed them down for anyone's comfort. Her eyes were amber, almost gold, and right now they were blazing. The second bolt of lightning struck close enough that the thunder arrived with zero delay, a concussive slap that knocked one of the merchants onto his backside and made the horses scream against their traces. The air smelled of hot sulfur and ozone and burned stone, which was, frankly, just how Cauldron Hollow always smelled, but more so tonight. Ursa rolled her shoulders and decided she was done being stared at by the storm. She turned around and walked back toward the wagon with a long, unhurried stride, scanning the trade road below with those gold eyes as she moved. The valley was not visible from up here through the clouds and the steam venting from the earth, but she knew it was down there, the warm glow of lantern light on pooled water, the smell of mineral springs, the clustered rooftops of steaming terrace, the only real town for 40 miles in any direction. Population, not many. Businesses, a few. Smiths, one. One was enough, she had decided, because she had heard things about that one. She had been 3 weeks out from her clan's temporary camp when the news reached her through a chain of trading contacts and road travelers, news that made her stomach tighten in a way that had nothing to do with fear. The Kettner Accord, the fragile, badly worded, barely enforced peace treaty between the 4 western clans and the human settlements of the Ash River Valley, had been broken. Specifically, a Kettner family militiaman named Durs Pell had walked into the clan encampment of the Bonethorn orcs during a scheduled truce gathering and put a crossbow bolt through Chief Hakkar Bonethorn's shoulder. Hakkar was alive, which was either good luck or bad depending on how you looked at it. Alive meant furious, and a furious Bonethorn chief meant war drums and spear bearers moving through the mountain pass in the direction of Ash River Valley before the next new moon. The truce had been 3 years old. It had been imperfect and underfunded and bitterly resented on both sides, but it had been something. Now it was a bolt hole in a chief's shoulder, and Ursa Strongtusk, who had helped negotiate the original accord, who had put her mark on its parchment and her reputation behind its words, was walking directly toward the center of the storm to try to stop it from becoming a catastrophe. She needed 2 things. Proof that Durs Pell had acted without official human sanction, and a human willing to carry that proof openly, in public, in front of both sides, at a time and place when weapons were already drawn and every instinct was pointed toward blood. She needed someone credible, someone known on both sides of the valley, someone who would not run when it got dangerous, and someone who was not affiliated with the Kettner militia that had caused the problem in the first place. What she had been told, by 3 separate people on the road, was that there was a weaponsmith in Steaming Terrace named Owen Ramsey, who had forged blades for half the Ash River settlements and sharpened machetes for Greytusk traders for 5 years, without ever cheating them or shorting them on work. and who had, 6 months ago, publicly refused a militia contract because the terms included a clause requiring him to deny service to orc customers. He had apparently read the clause aloud in the middle of the market square, looked the militia captain in the eye, and declined. People remembered that. Ursa's contact had said it with genuine surprise, like a man describing a weather event that should not have been possible. She had thought about it for 3 days and decided he was worth finding. Now she had found the road to Steaming Terrace. A storm had tried to kill her twice, and she was still walking. The merchants, a pair of middle-aged human brothers named Fent and Harold who traded in dried goods, and who had been, up until an hour ago, perfectly cordial toward her in the way that traveling humans often were toward lone orc women when there was no crowd to perform for, were now watching her return to the road with expressions that hovered between relief and residual alarm. "You are going to get struck," Fent said. "I have not been struck yet," Ursa said. "There were 2 bolts in 30 seconds, and neither of them touched me." She checked the sky again, calculating. The storm's center was moving northeast along the ridge line, which meant the road down into the valley would be exposed for another half-hour but passable. "We should move now, fast. The valley shelters the lower road." Fent looked at his brother. Harold looked at the horses. The horses looked like they would genuinely prefer to discuss this more. "The wagon wheel," Harold said, pointing at the cracked rear axle that had stopped them in the first place. Ursa looked at it. She had already looked at it twice. It was a clean crack, not a break, and the wood was dense hardwood ridgeback oak, she thought. "It will hold the descent if you do not let the horses panic. Keep them slow. I will walk beside the rear wheel and brace it if it starts to give." Fent stared at her. "You will brace a wagon wheel." "I am not small," Ursa said, which was accurate. She was very large for an orc woman, not quite the height of a tall human man, but close, and built in a way that made the word athletic feel insufficient. She had spent 2 decades as a clan envoy and trade negotiator, which meant she had spent 2 decades walking everywhere on foot, often through difficult terrain, often while carrying things, and it showed. "Start moving." They started moving. She walked beside the wagon with one hand ready at the wheel brace, and the storm rolled overhead and threw down 2 more strikes on the ridge behind them. And the road held, and the axle held, and 40 minutes later they came down out of the sulfur mist into the warm, steam-risen air of the valley floor, and Ursa saw Steaming Terrace for the first time. It was smaller than she had imagined, which was saying something because she had not imagined it large. It was a crooked scatter of buildings along 2 intersecting roads, built in the characteristic way of volcanic valley towns. Low stone walls as windbreaks, roofs weighted with flat river rocks, channels cut everywhere to redirect the hot spring water that seeped up through every piece of flat ground. There were lanterns burning in a dozen windows, despite the early hour, because the storm had killed most of the daylight. There was a tannery, a general store, 2 inns, what looked like a bathhouse built over one of the larger hot springs, and at the far end of the main street, set a little apart from the others, a building with a wide-open front and a chimney that was pouring heat even now, at this hour, even in the storm. The sign above the wide door was hand-carved and plain, RAMSCY blades and ironwork. Ursa thanked the merchants for the company. They thanked her somewhat incoherently for the axle brace. She left them at the general store and walked the length of the main street alone, feeling the eyes on her from windows and doorways, not acknowledging any of them. She stopped outside the forge. The sound coming from inside was rhythmic, certain, and unhurried. The sound of a hammer on hot steel, not frantic, not performative, just a steady, focused cadence that had its own kind of calm inside it. She could see the interior clearly through the open front. The forge itself against the back wall, banked but still radiating serious heat, a long workbench to the left covered in tools and iron stock and 2 blades in various stages of completion, and a man. He was medium height and built through the shoulders in the way of someone who had been doing physical work since adolescence. His hair was brown and fell past his ears, and was currently damp with sweat and curling at the ends. His face, she could see it in three-quarter profile, was not beautiful exactly, but it was a striking face in its own way, angular and focused with a jaw that looked like it had been cut rather than grown, and a long-healed scar running from his left temple to the edge of his left ear that gave him the appearance of someone who had been in at least one serious situation that he had declined to talk about afterward. His age was somewhere in the late 20s, she estimated. His arms were bare to the elbows, dark with forge smudge and firelight, and he was working a blade with a patience that looked almost meditative. He had not noticed her. She stood in the doorway and watched him for longer than was strictly necessary. Then she said, "Owen Ramsey." The hammer paused. He looked up without any particular alarm, just the easy alertness of someone used to customers appearing at odd hours, and then his eyes found her in the doorway and did not find her where he had expected to find someone. He took her in with a look that was not rude and not covert, just honest and direct. The tusks, the amber eyes, the weathered green of her skin against the dark leathers, the storm-damp hair, the hand resting on the machete hilt with the casual authority of someone who did not need to draw it to mean something. He looked at all of it without flinching, without the little muscle tightening around the eyes that most human men did in that first second when they were recalibrating. He just looked, and then he said, "Yes," in a way that meant he was still listening. "My name is Ursa Strongtusk," she said. "I was told you are honest and that you know people on both sides of the Ash River." "Both of those things have been true at various points," he said. "What else were you told?" "That you refused a militia contract 6 months ago." "Also true." He set the hammer down carefully, not like someone being cautious, but like someone who respected the work too much to just drop things. He was watching her with those dark eyes and the expression of a man who was doing several calculations at once and was not yet done. "You have come away in that storm." "The storm and I have an arrangement," Ursa said. "It tries to strike me and I do not let it." The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but something in the right direction. "Come in then. You are letting the heat out." She stepped inside and felt the forge warmth close around her like hands, and she noticed, in the way she always noticed things, that he did not take a step back when she came in. He just shifted to give her room, naturally, the way you shifted for a person whose presence you respected. She liked that. She told him what she knew in the order she knew it. The accord, the Bonethorn camp, the crossbow bolt, Hakar's shoulder, the war drums moving through the pass. She watched his face while she talked. It went through several things: a sharp tightening at Pel's name, a slow release of breath at the scale of the situation, and then a still, focused quality that she recognized as the expression of someone deciding what they were going to do before they had consciously done the deciding. When she finished, the forge fire popped and the storm muttered against the stone roof, and Owen Ramsey said, "And you need me to do what exactly?" "I need to get to the Bonethorn camp before the moon turns," Ursa said. "I need proof that Pel acted alone, which I believe I can get, because I know where he drinks and who he talks to when he is drinking. But I need someone to carry it into the open. Someone both sides know and do not have reason to call a liar. Someone who can stand in front of a chief with war spears pointed at him and not run." "And you think I can do that?" he said. "I think you might be the only person in this valley who has earned enough trust on both sides to try it." She paused. "I also think you will not say no just because it is dangerous." "How do you know that?" "Because you are still forging at this hour," Ursa said. "In the middle of a storm with no customer in sight, you finish what you start." He was quiet for a moment. She did not rush him. Outside, the thunder walked across the valley and moved on. "I want to be clear about one thing," he said. "I am not doing this because I owe anyone anything or because I have any particular death wish. I am doing it if I do it because the accord was the right idea and Pel was wrong, and because I have sold steel to people on both sides, and I am not interested in watching them use it on each other." "That is the correct reason," Ursa said. "All right," Owen Ramsey said. Tell me what you need me to bring." They talked for 2 more hours, and somewhere in the second hour, without any particular ceremony, he put a kettle over the forge coals and made 2 cups of bitter pine tea and handed her one. And she took it and drank it. And the storm finally moved on, and the valley went quiet and steaming and dark outside the open forge door, and Ursa sat on the edge of his workbench with the tea in her large hands and thought, for the first time since she had gotten the news about Hakkar, that this might actually work. The next morning, steaming Terrace saw something it had not seen before. Ursa Strongtusk walking down the main street beside Owen Ramsey in the early pale light, with the hot spring mist rising around their knees. He had a leather satchel over one shoulder with paper and charcoal in it, and the expression of a man going to work. She walked beside him with the machete on her hip, and the amber eyes cataloging everything and the town's eyes cataloging her right back. There was a man sitting outside the general store who made a comment. He said it at the right volume to carry, the way cowards say things, and Ursa heard it clearly. Something about tusks and the company that Ramsey apparently kept. She felt her jaw tighten and her shoulders start to square, and she was already turning toward him when she felt Owen's hand close briefly around her wrist, not grabbing, not restraining, just a light, certain press of warm fingers that communicated something without words. She looked at him. He shook his head, very small eyes on the general store man with a calm that was somehow more dangerous than anger. "Harwick," Owen said to the man in a voice that carried zero heat and significant weight, "I forged the hinges on that door you are sitting beside. Every fitting in your store is my work. I would hate for that to change." He looked at the man for one more moment, then back at the road. "Come on," he said to Ursa quietly. She walked with him, and after a moment she said, low and for him only, "You did not have to do that." "I know," he said. She turned her head and looked at his profile. He was looking ahead, easy, like that had been nothing. She did not say anything else, but something in her chest shifted, like a piece of metal cooling into the shape it was meant to hold. They spent that first day running down information. Owen knew the valley and its people with the intimacy of a man who had spent 5 years being the only person within 40 miles who could make or fix anything metal. He knew which militia members drank at which inn, who owed money to whom, whose wives talked to whose, and which stable hands had been present when Durs Pell rode out the morning of the truce gathering. By mid-afternoon, Ursa had a list of 4 names who might have information, and Owen had quietly arranged to speak to 2 of them in settings where being seen with him would feel natural. The first conversation happened at the bathhouse, where Owen had legitimate reason to be. There was ironwork in the pipe fittings that needed checking, and where a man named Colt Maris happened to use the outdoor soaking pool at the same time every afternoon. Colt was a former militia quartermaster who had, according to Owen's assessment, strong opinions about correct procedure and a bristling resentment of people who cut corners in his organization. Owen made the approach casual. Ursa stayed back, visible but not intrusive, and watched Colt Maris' face carefully. He talked. Not easily and not all at once, but he talked. Pell had told no one in advance. Not the captain, not the sergeant of arms, no one. He had ridden to the gathering on a personal errand as far as command was concerned. There were people who would say so formally if there was a reason that could not be twisted into treason against their own side. That was the critical piece. That was what Ursa needed. By the 3rd day, she had what could reasonably be called a case. 3 witnesses to Pell's unauthorized departure. A tavern keeper who had heard Pell say privately that he thought Hakkar needed a reminder of his place, and that nobody in command had the spine to give it to him, and a written statement from Colt Maris, notarized by the town charterkeeper, who happened to be Owen's neighbor and who had known Owen since he set up the forge, and trusted him in the way that people trust someone whose work they have relied on for years. She sat across from Owen at the small table in the back room of the forge, where he had cleared space among his tool racks and supply crates and pulled out a second chair, which she had been using as her working space for 3 days now, and she read through the collected documents for the 4th time. "This might be enough," she said. "Might be," Owen said. He was working on something at the bench, not one of the commission pieces, just a small personal project, a knife he was making for the pleasure of making it. She had noticed that he worked on it when he was thinking hard about something, like the movement gave his hands something to do while his mind ran the problem. The question is whether Hakkar will hear it or whether he is too far committed to the war road already. "Hakkar is angry," Ursa said. "He is not stupid. There is a difference." She set the papers down and leaned back in the chair and looked at the ceiling, which was low stone fitted together with precision and packed with dark clay that had sweated and hardened over years of forge heat. "He will hear it if the delivery is right." "Tell me about the delivery." She had been thinking about this since the road. She looked down from the ceiling and found him watching her over the blade he was working, and there was something in his eyes that was not strategy, a simple, direct interest in what she was going to say that had nothing to do with the problem at hand. She felt it and did not quite look away. "The Bonethorn camp is in the high valley north of the pass," she said. 10 days' walk, maybe 8 at speed. We cannot take horses, the high road after the pass narrows and the ground is unstable from the vent fields. We go on foot, we go as representatives, not fighters, and we go without concealed weapons, openly armed but obviously not here for a fight." "I am a weaponsmith," Owen said, "not a soldier." "Exactly, that is why it works." She leaned forward, elbows on the table. "You are not militia, not politics, not clan. You are a tradesman who has served both sides faithfully, coming under your own authority to say what he knows. That is harder to dismiss than any ambassador." He turned the knife in his hands, checking the edge. "And you?" "I am the mediator who put her name to the original accord. My coming back means I still believe in it." She paused. "That matters to Hakkar even now. He respected the accord enough to honor it for 3 years. He only moved when he thought it had been broken in bad faith." "Has it been?" "By Pell, yes." "By the Valley humans as a whole?" She shook her head. "No, and that is what we are going to prove." Owen set the knife down and looked at her directly. In the forge light he had the fire banked low for the evening, just enough to keep the room warm, and a pair of oil lanterns burning yellow on the workbench. His face was all shadow and angle, and that particular expression she was beginning to recognize, the one where he had decided something and was simply informing her of the decision. "All right," he said. "When do we leave?" 4 days, she said. "I want to give Maris time to think twice and then not reconsider. And I want a sealed copy of everything left here, with someone who will send it to the Valley Council if we do not return in 20 days. My neighbor Petra will do that," he said. "She is reliable and she does not like the militia much." "Good." Ursa stood, stretching the long muscles of her back, and looked around the back room with the particular assessment of someone who had been occupying a space and was deciding what she thought of it. She thought well of it, actually. It was not large and it was not decorated, but it was thoroughly itself. Everything in it was there for a reason and well kept, and exactly what it was, like the man who built it. "I should find somewhere to sleep." "There are 2 inns," Owen said. She looked at him evenly. He thought about it for about 2 seconds and then said without any particular ceremony, "The back room has a bedroll I keep for long night work. The door locks. You are welcome to it if you would rather not deal with the inns." Ursa looked at the back room, then at him. His expression was open and perfectly matter-of-fact, with exactly no calculation in it. "Thank you," she said. She slept in the back room of his forge, and woke to the sound of the hammer already going and the smell of hot steel and pine resin, and something that was becoming, in 3 days, simply the smell of a place where she did not feel unwelcome. She lay on the bedroll for a long moment before she got up, looking at the ceiling, listening to the rhythm of his work, and she was honest enough with herself to acknowledge that she was experiencing something she had not planned for. She got up and went to wash her face in the cold basin he had left for her, and did not think about it further. There was work to do. On the 2nd day of their joint preparation, Dur's Pell arrived in steaming terrace. Ursa heard about it from the innkeeper's daughter, who came to the forge with a message for Owen about a knife repair, and stopped on the threshold when she saw Ursa inside, and then delivered the message along with, in a breathless rush, The information that a militiaman had ridden in an hour ago on a big gray horse, and that he had gone directly to the general store, and that his name, she had heard him tell someone, was Pell. Ursa and Owen looked at each other across the workbench. "Checking," Owen said. "Seeing if the story is going to stay buried or if someone has been talking." "He knows Maris is here," Ursa said. "Maris lives here." Owen set down the piece he was working on with that deliberate care she had come to read as the precursor to something important. "I need to talk to Maris before Pell does." "Then go, I will stay back." She saw his expression and said with a slight edge, "I know what I look like to a militiaman right now, Owen. If Pell sees me with you, it changes what he does. If he thinks you are alone, he moves more slowly. Go." He held her gaze for a moment. There was something in his eyes she could not quite name, not disagreement exactly, more like a reluctance to walk away that was not entirely about strategy. Then he nodded, picked up his satchel, and went. She waited in the forge. She was not, by nature, a woman who waited well, but she was disciplined, and she spent the hour he was gone usefully, reviewing their documentation again and making a careful notes list of the exact order in which she planned to present it to Hakkar. She also, because she was practical, and because she had heard Owen describe the process once in the idle way of craftsmen who forget to stop talking about their work, checked on the progress of the commission blade he was halfway through, a long hunting knife for a valley rancher, and verified that the tempering oil was at the right temperature for whenever he got back to it. She did this without thinking too hard about why she was doing it. He came back an hour and a half later with a set jaw and the information that Maris had held. Pell had spoken to him, and Maris had said only that he was not a man who speculated in politics, which was technically true and also a complete deflection. Pell had ridden back out of town at speed. Owen had watched him go from the alley beside the inn. "He is riding north," Owen said. Ursa went very still. "He is going to the camp, ahead of us. If he gets there first and tells Hakkar's people that a group of valley humans is coming with documents, it can be framed as a trick. A human forger and the treaty orc who failed to protect the accord, arriving with papers." "Then we leave tonight," Ursa said. "Not 4 days, tonight." Owen looked at her, then at the half-tempered commission blade, then at the general state of things in his forge with the expression of a man rapidly reorganizing. "Give me 2 hours to close up here and pack what we need." "1," Ursa said. 1.5, he said, and went to work. They left Steaming Terrace in the deep dark of a clear night, with the volcanic peaks visible against the stars, and the hot spring pools glowing pale in the dark like eyes. Owen had packed light and practically food for 10 days. Good boots, a bedroll, 2 water skins, his belt knife, and a short sword that he wore without looking theatrical about it. Ursa carried her own supplies and the sealed document satchel. They moved at a pace that was neither a march nor a run, but something efficient between them, falling into a matched stride within the first half hour in the way that sometimes happens between two people whose bodies have the same fundamental rhythm. She noticed it. She did not comment on it. The first 3 days of the journey were hard but uncomplicated. The road climbed steadily out of the warm valley into the cooler heights, and the terrain shifted from the steam-vented flatlands to a landscape of black volcanic rock and sparse, wind-hammered trees. They camped at a good-sized stone outcrop on the second night that Ursa knew from a previous trip to the Bonethorn territory, and she built a fire in the protected hollow between 2 slabs, while Owen set up the bedrolls with the unself-conscious practicality of someone who had done enough rough camping to do it without ceremony. They ate dried provisions and talked about the approach strategy, about Hakkar's temperament, about the specific words she planned to use, and somewhere in the second hour of talking, after the fire had settled to a deep glow and the stars had fully taken the sky, Owen said something that was not about strategy at all. He said, "How long have you been doing this, the diplomatic work?" She looked at the fire. "Since I was 22, 12 years. And before that, fighting." She said it plainly, without drama. "I was a spear carrier in the border conflicts. The ones before the Kettner Accord was even an idea. I was there for 3 years of that before there was a ceasefire long enough to get to a table, and I was one of the people at the table because I was senior enough in the warband to speak for the fighters, and it turned out I was better at the table than the fighting. She paused. That is not false modesty. I was a competent fighter. At the table I was something better than competent. The Accord bore that out, Owen said. 3 years of peace is not nothing. It is fragile, she said. It always was. But it was real. She looked at him across the fire. What about you? Were you always here? No. He was quiet for a moment in the way that meant there was something that wanted more deciding about before being spoken. I came here 6 years ago. I trained under a master smith in Keld Keep, east of the mountains. Was there for 4 years. Then his daughter married me, and 2 years later she died of river fever, and I needed to go somewhere that was not the place where she had been. Ursa was quiet. She had not known that. The information reorganized something in what she understood of him, the self-sufficient calm, the forge that was also his entire living situation, the particular quality of someone who had chosen where to live rather than simply ended up there. I am sorry, she said. It was not a performance of sympathy. It was just true. It was 5 years ago, he said. It does not feel like yesterday anymore. He looked at the fire. She would have hated this trip. She was not built for rough country. But you are. I can be. He looked up at her, and there was something in his eyes by firelight that was very direct and not impersonal, and she felt it land somewhere in the center of her chest. I do not know that I was looking to be useful again in a way that mattered. But here we are. Here we are, she agreed, and the fire popped, and they listened to the mountain wind. And she did not tell him what she was thinking, which was that she had been doing this work alone for a very long time, and that sitting beside this particular fire with this particular man felt different in a way she did not quite have language for yet. On the 4th day, the terrain went bad. The volcanic vent fields that Ursa had warned him about were everything she had described, and then a half-mile stretch of cracked and seeping ground, where the earth was warm underfoot, and patches of the crust would give without warning into scalding mud pockets below. The safe path through was not marked, because no one wanted to encourage casual traffic through the high pass. You had to know it, and Ursa knew it, because she had crossed it once before in the opposite direction 3 years ago. She went first, testing each step, and Owen followed precisely in her track. Not because she told him to, but because he watched her first 2 steps with close attention and understood what she was doing. That quick, practical intelligence of his. She could feel him behind her, the careful weight of his footfalls, and she kept her attention split between the ground and the horizon, where she could see, distantly, the black spires of the pass. Halfway through the vent field she stopped. There was a sound ahead. Not the mountain sound of venting steam or settling stone. A human sound, movement, boot scrape, the specific careful tread of someone trying to be quiet and not quite managing it. She put her hand back without looking and found Owen's arm and pressed him still. They waited. 3 seconds, 5, 10. Then the figure appeared from behind a tall ventrock 30 yards ahead. A man, lean, wearing militia colors though he had turned his collar to hide the insignia, and he had a crossbow. He was looking directly at them, and the bolt was already drawn. Dur's Pell was not as far ahead as they had thought. That is far enough, Pell said. His voice was level with the flatness of genuine nervousness doing its best to sound like authority. Ursa took in the crossbow, the terrain, the man, and the distance in approximately 1 second. She had her hand on the machete, but she did not draw it. Drawing was wrong here. You did not escalate when you were the one wanting a peaceful resolution, even when the other person was pointing something at you. Dur's Pell, she said. We are not here for you. I know why you are here, Pell said, and I know what you are carrying. Put the satchel down. No, Ursa said. That was not a request. I know, she said. Owen stepped up beside her, and she wanted to tell him to stay back and did not, because she already understood that he was not someone you told to stay back. He stood at her shoulder with his hands visible and open, and his voice, when he spoke, was completely steady. Pell, he said, Colt Maris already notarized his statement. There is a copy in steaming terrace with my neighbor Petra. The satchel does not matter. It is already done. That was not entirely true. Petra had a sealed letter to deliver if they did not return, but the copy of the individual statements was indeed with her. It was true enough. Ursa recognized the gambit and did not move or change her expression because they were both reading Pell's face, and Pell's face was doing something complicated. The crossbow did not waver, but his eyes had gone into that frantic internal calculation that meant someone was reconsidering the consequences of their choices. "You are going to that camp to start something," Pell said. His voice had a crack in it now. "You want to set them against me." "We want to stop a war," Owen said. "One that you started when you shot Hackar Bonethorn at a peace gathering. We know it was unauthorized. We know your captain never ordered it. We are going to the camp to tell them that so that Hackar understands he has been wronged by one man, not by every person in this valley." "And then what?" Pell said. "You think that saves you? You think Greydusk over there is your friend? She will turn on you the moment the camp decides." "Do not," Owen said, and his voice dropped in a way that was not loud and was very serious. "Do not finish that." Pell's jaw tightened. The crossbow twitched. Ursa ran the geometry in her head. If she moved on him from this angle, at this distance, over this ground, the bolt would release, and the question was where it went, and whether she could get low enough fast enough. She did not like the numbers. And then Owen did something she had not expected. He took a step forward, not a lunge, not a run, just a single deliberate step on the cracked volcanic crust in the direction of the crossbow. As if the bolt were simply not a factor he was calculating. Pell blinked. The crossbow tracked him. "Pell," Owen said, taking the second step, "you made a mistake, a serious one. I am not going to pretend otherwise. But what you do right now determines whether it is the kind of mistake someone can come back from or the kind that follows a man to his grave. You can ride back to Steaming Terrace, find Captain Renner, and tell him everything. That is still a path. Point the crossbow at me a third time and there is not one." The silence on the vent field stretched for a very long time. Then Pell lowered the crossbow. He was shaking. Ursa could see it now. His hands were shaking. "You cannot tell him it was on my orders," he said, and his voice was small and miserable. "Renner will. We will only tell Hackar and his council what we know," Owen said. "That Renner did not authorize it. That is all. What Renner does after is between you and him, and that is not our concern." He paused. "Go home, Pell." Pell looked at Ursa. She met his eyes and said nothing because there was nothing to say that would help him. He left. They heard his footsteps moving away north through a different track in the vent field, and then they were alone in the sulphurous quiet with the distant sound of the mountain wind. Ursa let out a breath. She looked at Owen, who was standing in the middle of the vent field with his hands still open at his sides and his heart, if she had to guess, probably pounding rather harder than he was showing. "You stepped toward the crossbow," she said. "It seemed like the right move," he said. "That is either very brave or very reckless." "I was hoping it was both," he said, and the corner of his mouth moved, and she looked at him in the thin volcanic light and thought, "This man." She did not say anything else. She reached out and straightened the collar of his jacket, which had gone sideways in the wind, and let her hand rest there for a second longer than the task required. He was very still. Then she turned back to the path through the vent field and said, "Come on, we are losing light." He came, and they did not talk about it, but he walked closer to her after that. Not obviously, not pressing, just closer. The way two people move when something that was a partnership becomes something slightly more than that. They cleared the vent field before dark and camped on the high plateau on the northern side of the pass, where the air was colder and the sky enormous, and the Bonethorn peaks were close enough now to see individual crags. Ursa built the fire small and efficient. Owen cooked. She had not realized until the second night that he was genuinely good at campfire cooking, patient and methodical, making something reasonable out of dried provisions and water, and the small amount of fresh green he foraged in the low scrub. She watched him do it and did not offer to help, because she did not cook well and he did, and she was comfortable with the arrangement. They ate in companionable quiet, and after a while she said, without much preamble, "Owen," he looked up. "What I said about being better at the table than the fighting," she said. "I meant it. I want you to understand that I am not a person who needs someone to stand in front of a crossbow for me. I can stand in front of crossbows. I have done it." "I know," he said. "I am saying that I noticed. When you stepped forward, I noticed what it was." She looked at the fire. "That is all." He was quiet for a moment. "You would have gone for him," he said. "I was watching your hand. You were 2 seconds from the machete. If you had moved over that ground at speed on cracked rock and he had released, I might have been fast enough." "Might," he said. "I was not interested in might." She looked at him. The fire between them was small and the night was large and cold, and the stars were the kind that only appeared at this altitude, thick and low and completely indifferent. His face was very even, very open, in the way she was realizing was just how he looked when he was saying something that mattered to him without dressing it up. "You were not interested in might," she repeated. "No," he said. The word sat between them on the cold air for a moment, and Ursa Strongtusk, who had negotiated trade agreements and ceasefire terms and territorial boundaries with clan chiefs and human councils, and who was not, in the ordinary way of things, at a loss for words, found that she did not quite have anything to say to that. So she did not say anything. She looked at him a moment longer, and then she looked at the fire, and she let the warmth of what he had meant settle into her chest and stay there. The Bonethorn war camp announced itself a day and a half later by smell smoke, hide, orc fire, the particular dense human and earth smell of a large group of people who had been moving through rough country for some time and had set up in a place that was theirs. Ursa knew the smell. It was not threatening to her. It was, if anything, a complicated comfort. The sentries found them half a mile from the camp perimeter. There were 4 of them, young and armed and serious, and they had their spears angled in the classic way that meant stop and explain yourselves, or the next message you send will be sent by your body on the ground. Ursa stopped, raised her hands to shoulder height, and said in the Bonethorn clan dialect, close enough to her own Greydusk tongue that she had some confidence in it, that she was Ursa Strongtusk, that the human with her came as a witness for peace, and that she was requesting audience with Chief Hakkar on a matter of treaty honor. The word honor landed. She had meant it too. In Bonethorn culture, a request framed around honor could not be refused without cost to the person refusing it. They were held at the perimeter for an hour, sitting on a flat rock with 2 spears pointed their direction, while a runner went to the camp. Owen sat beside her without fidgeting, which she appreciated, and watched the terrain with a calm interest. Twice she heard him draw a slow breath and release it, the exact pattern of someone managing their nerves with discipline rather than feeling none, and she found she respected that more than the absence of nerves would have represented. "You are doing well," she said quietly. "I have no idea what I am doing," he said, just as quietly. "You are sitting still under a spear without running," she said. "That is the relevant competence. That is a low bar," he said. "It is lower than you think," she said, and his mouth moved, almost a smile, and one of the sentries gave them a suspicious look that they both ignored. The runner returned. They were brought into the camp. Ursa had been in war camps before, but this one was large, 300 people, maybe more, with a fighter density that suggested the main body of the Bonethorn clan rather than just a war band. This was not preparation for a raid. This was preparation for something that could go a great many different directions, and the people in the camp knew it. She could read it in the way they moved, purposeful, controlled, but with the specific tight quality of people who are holding something back, waiting for the word. Hakkar Bonethorn was in the chief's tent, which was large and well appointed in the way of permanent leadership rather than traveling camp, heavy felt walls, hide carpets, a central fire trench rather than a brazier. He was a big man for an orc, heavy through the shoulders and face, with the traditional Bonethorn triple tusk filing on his upper jaw that left 2 prominent points. His wounded shoulder was bandaged, and by the way he sat, the angle of it, the bolt had hit muscle and it had been serious. He was alive, as reported, and he was furious, as predicted. He looked at Ursa for a long time when she came in. Then he looked at Owen with the expression of a man who is deciding what category of thing he is dealing with. "Greytusk woman," he said, "you come here with a human at your back." "I come here with a witness," Ursa said, "and with documents. I am asking for the hearing that the accord promises to any signatory requesting review of a treaty violation. The accord is broken." "One man broke it," Ursa said. "One unauthorized man. That is what I am here to tell you." And this man, she indicated Owen, who was standing at her right side with the satchel and the open, undisguised directness that was simply his ordinary face, is here to confirm it as a human independent of the militia, known to both sides of the valley, who has spoken to the witnesses himself. Hakar's eyes moved to Owen. "You are Ramsey," he said, "the blade maker." "Yes," Owen said. "You have 3 of my knives in this camp, I believe. Traded through Greytusk contacts 2 winters back." Hakar was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You came across the high pass with this woman to tell me that the shooting was not official human business." "I came because the accord was the right idea," Owen said, "and because I believe it is worth trying to keep. And because the man who shot you made a choice that his commanders did not authorize and do not support, and I can prove that to you." Hakar looked at the satchel. "Show me," he said. What followed was the most important meeting of Ursa's diplomatic career, and she was in it fully, laying out each document, translating where needed, reading aloud the statements, explaining the context of each piece of evidence with the clear, precise, unrhetorical language that she had spent 12 years developing for exactly this kind of moment. She watched Hakar's face move through anger into something more complicated, something that had room in it for the possibility that the situation was not the absolute betrayal it had appeared to be. Owen said very little. He answered direct questions from Hakar's council. There were 3 elders present, 2 of them skeptical and one of them, a quiet older woman who had been at the original accord signing, clearly already leaning toward hearing the whole case, with the same calm directness he brought to everything. He confirmed what he had seen and heard. He did not embellish or minimize. He was not performing trustworthiness. He simply was trustworthy, which was different, and Ursa thought the elders could feel the difference, because the skeptical ones softened by increments as the presentation went on. At the end, Hakar sat quietly for a long time. "The accord says that a treaty violation by an unauthorized individual does not constitute a violation by the signatory group," the quiet elder woman said. She said it carefully, as though testing the words. "That is what it says," Ursa confirmed. "I wrote that clause. I wrote it because I knew this situation was possible." "You knew a human would shoot me," Hakar said, with a particular dryness that was not quite humor but was not entirely not humor either. "I knew that people on both sides would do unauthorized things," Ursa said. "I knew it because I know people. I put the clause there so that we would have a way to handle it without burning 3 years of work." Hakar looked at Owen again. "And you," he said, "what do you get from this?" "I get to sell steel to both sides of a valley that is not on fire," Owen said. "And I get to keep living in a town where I know the names of people on both sides of the pass, which I would rather have than the alternative." Hakar was quiet for another long moment. Then he said something in deep Bonethorn dialect, low and toward the council, that Ursa followed at about 70%. It was something about men who spoke plainly being worth more than men who spoke well, and she thought that was probably meant as a compliment. The council deliberated for 2 hours, during which Ursa and Owen were given food and space and were not, notably, put back under spear guard. That was itself a signal. By the time the deliberation ended, Ursa had eaten something that was actually very good, a dense grain porridge with spiced oil and dried mountain berries, and Owen had been drawn into a quiet conversation with one of the camp's younger craft workers about the properties of different iron sources in the volcanic region, which was exactly the kind of conversation he could apparently have with anyone at any time without planning it. The council's conclusion was not the Accord's immediate full reinstatement. It was something more realistic, a conditional ceasefire, a requirement that the Kettner militia formally acknowledge Pell's unauthorized action within 30 days, and a scheduled reopening of Accord terms in 6 weeks with both signatories present. It was not the clean resolution Ursa had hoped for, but it was enough. It was the war drums stopping. It was the spear-bearers not moving through the pass. It was 3 years of work preserved. She accepted the terms on behalf of the Great Usk clan signatories, with the understanding that she would carry the terms to the Valley Council on the return. Owen accepted nothing on anyone's behalf. He was not a representative of anyone, but he witnessed the verbal agreement and agreed to deliver a copy of the terms to the steaming Terrace Charter Office, which gave it an additional anchor of documentation. They left the Bonethorn camp the next morning, and Hakkar himself came to the edge of the perimeter to watch them go. He said nothing. But as Ursa passed him, he reached out and touched the brim of his own hand to his shoulder, the wound, and then to hers, which in Bonethorn language meant something like, "I see what you carried here, and I acknowledge it." It was not a common gesture. It made her throat tight in a way she would not show. Owen caught it. She saw his eyes, quiet and understanding, and she turned her face forward and he walked beside her. They were 3 days back from the camp, camped on the plateau with the high peaks behind them when it happened. She had been watching him for days, not obviously, not with the direct amber-eyed stare she used when she was assessing a situation, but in the way she looked at things she was deciding about. He moved through the world with a quality that she did not quite have the right word for in any language she spoke. He was not careless, but he was not anxious either. He was present, and he was kind in a way that was not performed or strategic, and he had stepped toward a crossbow for reasons that she understood now had not been purely tactical, and that understanding had been sitting in her chest for 4 days, making itself felt in a way she was done pretending not to notice. It was the second night on the plateau, and the fire was going and the supper was done, and Owen was sitting with his back against a flat boulder, looking at the stars, and Ursa was sitting beside him, closer than she had been the first night on this stretch, because the nights had gotten colder and the boulder held heat, and she was aware, with the exact awareness of someone who is not deceiving themselves, that the cold was not the primary reason she was sitting close. She said, "I want to tell you something." He looked at her, open and patient the way he always was. "I did not come to Steaming Terrace to find a partner for this," she said. "I came to find a reliable human witness. That was the whole of my plan." "I know," he said. "And that plan changed," she said. "Or something else happened alongside it. And I am not good at leaving things unsaid when I notice them, so I am saying this. I notice you, Owen. I notice you specifically, not as a useful person, not as a reliable witness. I notice you." He was quiet for a moment, looking at her face in the firelight with the expression she had learned to read as him being honest with himself about something before saying it. "I have been hoping," he said carefully, "that I was not misreading things." "You were not misreading things," she said. "Then I should tell you," he said, "that I have been noticing you since the first night at the forge, the way you think, the way you are with people, the way you did not say anything when Harwick made that comment in the street, and the way you looked at me when I did." He paused. "You looked at me like you were surprised." "I was," she said. "You should not have been," he said. "You should not have to be surprised by basic decency." "The world is the world," she said. "The world can also change," he said, "if people decide to make it." He reached over and took her hand, not hesitantly, not as an accident, but with the deliberate gentleness of someone who knew what they were doing and meant it. And she let him. And they sat beside the fire on the high plateau with his hand around hers, and the stars enormous above them, and the mountain wind moving cold and clean through the dark. And she felt, for the first time in longer than she could immediately remember, that she was not alone in a way that had nothing to do with literal solitude. She turned her hand over in his and held it back. He was not a man who needed to fill silence with noise, which was one of the things she had noticed first, and it was very evident now in the way they sat together without speaking for a long time, just existing in the same space with the fire between them and the night around them. Then he turned to look at her, and she was already looking at him, and the distance between them was not much, and she leaned in and he came to meet her, and they kissed in the way of two people who have been deciding this for days and who, now that it is happening, find it is nothing like tentative. She felt his hand come up to her jaw, and she tasted the campfire smoke on his breath and the pine tea from supper, and her hand found the front of his jacket and she held on, and the kiss was not brief and it was not chaste, and when it ended she kept her forehead against his for a moment, both of them breathing slow and warm in the cold air. "Well," he said quietly. "Yes," she said. He smiled, a full one this time, the real smile that she had been catching the edges of for days, and that turned out to be something that landed squarely in her center with the warmth and impact of a well-forged blade finding its mark. She felt it in her hands and the backs of her knees, and she let it in. She did not go back to her side of the fire. She stayed beside him against the boulder's warmth, and they talked until the fire was low and the cold made the talking impractical, and they slept close and warm with the mountain dark around them. Coming down out of the high pass was different from going up. The terrain was the same, the vent fields, the black rock, the narrow paths, but something had shifted in the quality of light between them, and Ursa noticed it in practical things. The way he always found her hand when the footing was uncertain, and the way she moved naturally into his space rather than leaving the habitual half-foot of diplomatic distance between herself and every human she dealt with. The machete was still on her hip. The satchel was still on her shoulder. Nothing about the world had changed. But the feeling of it had. On the descent through the vent field, they moved together now instead of in single file, which was technically less safe, but which was what happened when two people no longer wanted to be separated by the distance of a footstep. She went first where she needed to, and he followed her reading of the ground without a word, and the ground held, and on the far side of the worst section there was a place where the path narrowed and she had to turn sideways, and he was right behind her, and she could feel the warmth of him at her back, solid and present, and she thought, this is what it means to have someone at your back. They made the plateau camp by mid-afternoon and chose to push on rather than camp again, and by evening they could see the beginning of the valley below, the faint warm glow of steaming terrace visible as a cluster of light against the dark ground, and Ursa stood and looked at it and felt something she could only call the feeling of coming back to somewhere. She had not felt that about a place in a long time. They were back in steaming terrace by full dark, and the town did not greet them with any particular ceremony, which was exactly right. Ursa went with Owen to the forge, because that was where she had been living and because neither of them raised the question of whether she should go to an inn now, which settled that. He lit the forge for the first time in 10 days, not for work, just for the heat of it, which the stone building needed after standing cold. And she went to the back room and put down her satchel and her machete, and stood for a moment in the small enclosed space that smelled of tool oil and stored iron stock, and the particular familiar smell of having slept here. And she was aware of a deep, settled quiet inside her that was not tiredness, or not only tiredness. She went back out to the main forge floor, where Owen was feeding the fire and the warmth was beginning to come up properly, and she stood behind him and put her hands on his shoulders, and he went still in the way of someone registering something significant, and she felt the weight and breadth of him under her hands and said, quietly, "We did it." He turned around, and his eyes were warm and full of the firelight, and he said, "We did," and he reached up and put his hands over hers where they rested on his shoulders and held them there, and the forge fire climbed, and the heat began to fill the stone room, and outside the volcanic valley was dark and steaming and perfectly quiet. The next morning, Ursa rode to the valley council while Owen reopened the forge. She presented the Bonethorn terms to a council that had been in a state of controlled emergency for 2 weeks, and she was thorough and exact and left them with the documentation and the certainty that if they let 30 days pass without formally censuring Pell and acknowledging the unauthorized nature of his act, the conditional ceasefire would dissolve. The council was frightened enough to move quickly. Pell was, within the week, formally censured and stripped of his militia rank. The acknowledgement of his unauthorized action was sent to the Bonethorn camp by 2 separate messengers. The clock on the Accord's reopening began. Ursa handled every piece of this from Steaming Terrace, because Steaming Terrace was where she was. She was not entirely sure when the decision had been made. There had not been a single moment, a single conversation where she had said, "I am staying here," or he had said, "Stay." It had simply happened in the way of things that are inevitable. She had a base of operations in the forge's back room. She had work to do that was geographically centered on the valley. And she and Owen had a rhythm together that had begun on the road and had settled, back in the forge, into something daily and warm and easy in the way that things are easy when they are right. He worked. She worked. They existed in the same space with the comfortable overlap of 2 people who have found they can think in each other's presence, which is not a small thing. She used the back room table as her office, and he made her tea in the mornings without asking, 2 cups, set one at her elbow while she was reading, and she appreciated it every time without saying so explicitly, which he understood. They had the first fight 3 weeks after returning, which was about something practical. She had moved a piece of his commission stock to make room for her documents, and he had needed it and not found it where it should be and come to ask, reasonably, if she knew where it was. And she had been in the middle of something complicated and had said something shorter than she should have, and he had said something with more edge than he intended, and for 20 minutes there was a tight, unpleasant quality to the air in the forge. Then she had gone to find him at the workbench and said plainly, "I was too sharp. That was wrong," and he had said just as plainly, "I was not patient. I apologize." And they had looked at each other and something in the air had released, and she had touched his face briefly with 2 fingers at his jaw, and he had closed his eyes for a second, and that had been that. They were not people who left things festering. That was useful. The second Accord negotiation happened 5 weeks after the return from the Bonethorn camp. Ursa had spent those 5 weeks preparing, drafting new language for the disputed clauses, writing to her Great Usk clan contacts to confirm their ongoing support, and communicating with the Valley Council's representatives about the format of the renegotiation. It was the most intensive piece of work she had done since the original Accord 3 years earlier, and she did it from the table in the back room of a forge in Steaming Terrace, while the sound of hammering and the smell of hot metal wrapped around her like something she had not known she wanted. Owen came to the negotiation. He did not come as a representative of anyone. He came as a witness and a guarantor of character. His presence was a statement to both sides that the process was being conducted in good faith, because Owen Ramsey had demonstrated good faith to everyone present, and nobody on either side had a compelling argument to make against him. Hackar looked at him when the session opened and made a specific point of acknowledging him, which was a significant piece of Bonethorn's social protocol, and Owen received it with a steady, respectful inclination of his head that was not a bow and not an obeisance, just a sincere acknowledgement. And Ursa, sitting at the table with her papers in front of her and her tusks catching the lamplight, felt something warm spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the diplomacy. The renegotiated accord was better. It had clearer language, a formal unauthorized action clause that had real teeth, a designated mediator protocol for future incidents, and a trade cooperation provision that meant both sides had concrete economic reasons to keep the peace that were not dependent on anyone's goodwill. It was not perfect, but no accord was perfect, and this one had the advantage of having been built by people who understood specifically how the last one had broken. Ursa put her mark on it in both Greydusk and Valley Common script, and felt the kind of satisfaction that was not triumph, but was something quieter and more lasting. She had started this work believing in it, and she still believed in it, and that was not nothing. It was the day after the accord signing that the incident in the market happened. She had known it was coming, in the general sense of knowing that something of this kind was always coming, in any town where she stayed long enough to become visible. Steaming Terrace was not a hostile place. It was small and practical, and most of its people were too busy with their actual lives to spend energy on active resentment. But it had edges, like every place, and the edges sometimes found her. The market at Steaming Terrace happened twice a week in the broad space at the junction of the two main roads, and it was a genuinely good market for a town this size. Local produce, ironwork from Owen and from the valley's other small smiths, preserved food, tools, fabrics, the particular thermal water mineral salts that were the valley's most notable regional export, and that people came from considerable distances to buy. Ursa went to the market on a Tuesday for salt, and for a specific kind of wax she used to seal document cases, and she was perfectly unremarkable about it, carrying a flat basket and paying correct prices and exchanging nods with the stall keepers she recognized. The group of men were at the far end of the market, and she noticed them when she noticed them noticing her. There were 4 of them, young, traveling by their look, not locals, and they had the particular energy of men who were together and looking for something to perform for each other. She had seen the type before. She angled her path to give them more distance. They adjusted their path to close it. She stopped in the middle of the market, in front of the largest central stall. A salt vendor named Edna, who had been selling here for 20 years, and who had the personal authority of a woman who did not tolerate nonsense at her table. And she turned to face the 4 men with the patient, open expression she used when someone was about to be a problem, and she was deciding the shape of her response. The leader of the group was a thick-necked young man with a red coat and the particular expression of someone who had been told he was funny. He made a comment about tusks. He made another one about the accord, specifically a version of the common complaint that the new accord was the fault of the orc community, which had, in his reading, manufactured the entire Bonethorn incident in order to extort better terms. It was not an original argument. Ursa had heard it 6 times since the renegotiation. She had a prepared, measured response to it. She delivered the measured response. He was not interested in the measured response. He escalated. He made a comment about her human. The phrase was delivered with a specific inflection that was designed to land like a blow, and it did land, but not in the way he expected, because Ursa Strongtusk did not flinch and did not back up, and her expression did not change. What changed was that Owen was there. He had been at the ironwork stall across the market and had come over, not running, not dramatically, just walking fast and direct in the way of someone who has seen something from across a space and has come to stand somewhere specific. He stood beside her. Not in front of her, beside her, with the clear body language of someone who is part of this situation, not trying to resolve it on behalf of someone who does not need him to. "The ironwork you are looking at," Owen said to the red-coated man, in a conversational tone that had a great deal of compressed information in it. "Half of it is mine. The fitting on that bathhouse, the hinge work on half the doors in this market, the wheel fittings on the mayor's wagon. I know everyone here." He paused. "Do you want to continue this conversation?" The red-coated man looked around the market. He appeared to be taking account of how many people were watching, and the answer was, everyone. Every person in the market had gone quiet and was watching with the attentive stillness of people who have been waiting for something and are not sure what it will be. "She is an orc at a human accord," the man said, and his voice had lost some of its performance edge, but he was not backing down because his friends were there, and backing down in front of friends has its own cost. "She is the person who saved this valley from a war," Owen said, "and she is with me. Those are the 2 things that are relevant here." The man started to say something else, And that was when the crate happened. He reached out and knocked one of Edna's salt crates off her stall, perhaps as a distraction, perhaps out of pure frustrated aggression, and it fell toward Ursa, and the reaction from the crowd was the collective intake of breath of people watching a small, stupid thing become something bigger than it should be. Ursa caught the crate. This would have been fine, except that it was not a small crate. It was a full salt transit crate, the kind that Edna received bulk deliveries in, packed solid and heavy enough that two of the market boys typically helped her unload them from wagons. It weighed as much as a grown man, and then some. It had been on the edge of the stall at chest height, and it fell outward, and Ursa stepped into it and caught it with both hands, not dropping it, not staggering, not even particularly shifting her balance. She caught it and held it, and for a moment she just stood there holding this enormous crate of salt at chest height as if it were a basket, and the entire market was completely silent. She turned and set it back on the stall with a precise, level placement. She looked at the red-coated man. He was white. All four of them were. The market was silent in a way that markets almost never are, the particular silence of people who have just witnessed something that recalibrated what they thought they knew. Edna, behind her salt stall, said, in a matter-of-fact tone, "Thank you, dear." "My pleasure," Ursa said. The four men left. They did not say anything further. They walked out of the market with the specific gait of people who have made a decision very quickly and feel strongly about its correctness. Ursa watched them go and then looked at Owen beside her, and he was looking at her with an expression that was a complex and genuinely beautiful mixture of things: respect, and something much warmer than respect, and a particular quality of almost suppressed delight that she had only seen on his face a few times and that she found she liked very much. "You were going to let him talk," Owen said. "Up to a point," she said. "And then?" "Then the crate was more efficient," she said. And he laughed, a real one, sudden and warm, and she felt it in her chest like the first warm day after a long cold. The market went back to its business around them with the speed of a place that has been entertained and is satisfied. And Edna sold Ursa the salt and the document wax at no charge and said, in the private way of one woman to another, that it was good to see some sense in the valley. They walked back from the market together in the afternoon light, the valley full of steam and warmth and the smell of the hot springs, and at some point, without discussion, Owen took her basket, because it was heavy and she was carrying documents under her other arm, and she let him. They walked through the main street, and the town looked at them with the adjusted look of people who had been calibrating since the market, and nobody said anything unpleasant, and Ursa felt the particular satisfaction of a situation that had resolved in the right direction. That evening, after supper, sitting at the small cleared end of the workbench that had become their shared evening space, Owen said, "I keep thinking about something." She looked at him. "This thing between us," he said, with a directness that was both characteristic of him and slightly braver than usual. "I do not want to assume about what it is or where it goes. I want to know what you want it to be." Ursa looked at him for a moment. The forge was banked low, just heat and a red glow, and the evening outside was quiet with distant spring steam and the sound of the town settling. She set down the document she had been reviewing. "I want it to be what it is," she said, "which is that I have not felt this way about anyone in a long time, and I do not intend to pretend otherwise. I want to be here, with you. In this place that smells of hot metal and pine tea, in this valley where I helped build something I believe in, with the person who stepped toward a crossbow for reasons that I am still thinking about." She paused. "I want that to be the shape of it. Permanent, if that is what both of us choose." He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "That is what I want too." "Then we are in agreement," she said, and smiled, and he smiled back, and the forge fire reflected in his dark eyes and hers, amber and warm, and it was exactly as simple and exactly as enormous as it sounded. There was one more thing that needed to be settled, and she settled it 3 weeks later when she sent a formal message to the Great Us Clan Council through the Trade Contact Network. The message said that she was establishing a permanent base of operations in Steaming Terrace for the purpose of ongoing accord management and mediation services in the Ash River Valley, and that she would maintain her clan affiliation and her status as Great Usk Treaty envoy from this location. It also said, in the blunt and unembellished way of a Great Usk woman reporting fact to her council, that she was in a permanent partnering relationship with a human man named Owen Ramsey, bladesmith of Steaming Terrace, and that this information was provided for council record. The council's response came 3 weeks after that, carried by a trade wagon and containing 2 things: a formal letter of acknowledgement that was entirely in order, bureaucratically correct, and warmly if tersely phrased, and a personal letter from her cousin Mara, who was on the council and who had known Ursa since childhood, which said, and she read this to Owen at the workbench, because it was the kind of thing that deserved to be shared, that she was glad, and that it was past time, and that she had known since the first time she heard Ursa describe the bladesmith in Steaming Terrace that there was something different in her voice, and that she expected to be invited to visit before the year was out because she intended to inspect this man herself, and she was not joking. Owen listened to this and said, "She is welcome any time." "She will talk your ear off," Ursa warned. "I will make her tea," he said. Ursa folded the letter and put it in the document case and sat for a moment in the warm forge room with the particular feeling of things having landed. The piece she had built was holding. The man she had found in the most practical and unromantic of ways, through a chain of trade contacts and a road traveler's third-hand recommendation, was sitting 4 feet away from her sharpening a new commissioned blade with the focused, deliberate patience that was simply how he moved through every task. The town outside was quiet and steaming, and hers in the way a place becomes yours when you choose it. She got up and crossed to him and put her hands on his shoulders from behind, as she had done the night they returned, and he set the blade down carefully, the way he always set things down, and he reached up and covered her hands with his. "What are you thinking?" he said. "That I came here for a witness," she said, "and ended up with considerably more." He turned on the forge stool to face her, which brought his face close to hers, and he said, "Same." And then he kissed her in the warmth of the forge, with the evening light coming in low through the wide-open front and the hot spring steam rising outside in visible columns. And she held onto the front of his shirt and he held onto her. And it was, by any reasonable measure, exactly what they had both been hoping for. The Bonethorn Accord, as it came to be called, held. It held through the following spring and through the summer heat and through the winter after that, when the pass was blocked with snow, and the valley settlements and the clan camps were mutually dependent on the trade networks that the Accord had formalized, which was exactly the kind of concrete interdependence that made agreements last. There were incidents. There were always incidents, because people were people, and Ursa handled each of them from the forge office with documentation and precision, and the occasional direct journey to wherever the problem was. And Owen continued to make steel for both sides and to be quietly, durably the same person he had always been. And between them the space they occupied was small and warm and completely their own. Mara did come to visit toward the end of the year, and she was everything she had been advertised. Loud, perceptive, inclined to say exactly what she thought in the precise moment she thought it, and deeply, evidently fond of her cousin. She inspected Owen with an unself-conscious directness that he received with equanimity, and she asked him at one point whether he had been afraid in the Bonethorn camp, and he said, "Nervous, not afraid." And Mara had looked at him for a moment and then looked at Ursa and said in Great Usk dialect something that roughly translated to, "Yes, I see it," and then switched back to common and drank his pine tea and was, as she had threatened, a great deal. She stayed 4 days and left with a custom hunting knife that Owen made her, which she had not asked for, and which he had simply decided to do, because he had watched her use a badly balanced camp knife on her second evening there, and had considered it his professional obligation. She held the finished blade and ran a thumb along the flat of it with an expression of genuine reverence, and said to him, "You are allowed," which was a Greytusk phrase that meant, approximately, that he had been evaluated and found worthy, and that she approved of the arrangement. Owen did not know exactly what it meant, but he understood from the context, and he smiled the full smile that Ursa had claimed as one of her favorite things, and Mara left satisfied. On the morning she left, Ursa stood at the edge of the main road and watched the wagon carry her cousin south, and Owen stood beside her with a cup of tea in each hand, and when the wagon had rounded the corner and gone out of sight, he handed her one. She took it. She leaned into his side just slightly, which was a thing she had started doing when they were standing somewhere and she wanted to, which was increasingly most times they were standing somewhere. He put his arm around her, warmly, easily. "Good visit," he said. "She likes you," Ursa said. "I know," he said, with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had been paying attention to all the signals and had known exactly how it came out. She turned her head and looked at him in the morning light, which was clear and pale and fell across the hot spring steam in the valley in a way that made everything look lit from within. His face in that light was the face she had been waking up beside for months now, and she had not gotten used to it in the sense of taking it for granted, which was something she had been afraid of, that familiarity would become invisibility. It had not. He was as specifically, entirely himself to her now as he had been in the forge on the first night, and she thought she could see another year of this, and another after that without any reduction in its value. "Owen," she said. "Ursa," he said, matching her tone without mockery. "I am glad I walked down that road in the storm," she said. He looked at her for a moment. Outside, the valley breathed its mineral steam into the cool morning air, and somewhere down the main street someone was opening a market stall, and the sound of it carried clear in the stillness. The forge behind them was not yet lit, because it was early, but in an hour it would be banked and climbing and the day would begin properly, with work and heat, and the thousand small competencies of two people who had found their place. "I am glad you did not get struck by lightning," he said. "The storm and I have an arrangement," she said. "I remember you saying that," he said, and he smiled, and she smiled too, and they stood in the morning together, warm and clear-eyed and entirely sure of where they were. The valley steamed around them. The forge waited. The work was good, and the peace was holding, and the two of them were exactly where they had chosen to be.